Why do farmers always need subsidies? Well, y'all not letting me ease into this episode. You hit me with a haymaker right from the get-go. I'm Matt Griggs. I grow cotton, corn, soybeans, and wheat here in Tennessee. Let's answer your questions from the internet. This is farming support. Okay, first question. How do you get your straight, regular lines in your fields? Seems to me that farmers take some pretty serious pride in having perfectly straight rows in their fields. Well, I'd like to say it's all due to operator ability. Unfortunately, I would be lying to you. Most of our modern tractors that we use now have what we call auto steer. The onboard computer is the one that's actually doing the steering of the tractor as we're going through the field. I tell you what, let's actually go to the field and I will show you how this works. Auto steer is possible because of the GPS systems that we have on this tractor. When we get to the field, we'll set what we call a guidance line. To get a straight row, we set what we call an AB line. That means that we will put the tractor in the position that we want. On the computer, we will go to the other end of the field and we will mark a B point. And then the computer will draw a perfectly straight line between the A point and the B point, hit our auto steer button, and the tractor takes over and will actually steer to the line. And then that line will then be repeated across the field. And that's how farmers get their perfectly straight lines in the field. This next one is from the Homestead subreddit. What are your must-have tools, equipment on the farm? For one thing, we need a tractor to pull the various implements that we need to raise crops, whether it be a planter, a plow, a sprayer to apply pesticides. We need a harvest machine to be able to harvest the crop. A combine or a combine harvester can actually harvest multiple different crops, but all of them are going to be grain. If you're growing other types of crops, you're probably going to need a specific type of harvester just for that crop. If you're a grain farmer and you want to be able to take a maximum advantage of the commodity market and sell your crops at the highest prices, you might need a system of grain bins in order to store that crop. You're probably going to need several equipment sheds to store your equipment under because this equipment is hundreds and thousands of dollars and you don't want it sitting outside in the weather during the times that you're not going to use it. This question comes from Past 1700. How do you keep track of what you're growing, how much you're growing, and when to harvest? Do you use any tools, apps, spreadsheets, farm software to help manage costs, sales, or inventory? There's a multitude of different tools that we use. Just about every time that we make a trip across the field, the tractors or harvester or sprayer that we're using has an onboard computer that is logging what we're actually doing. This is a map of one of our fertilizer applications. The red parts of the field indicate where we were applying more fertilizer, whereas the green parts are where we were applying less fertilizer. And all of this is based upon the soil test that we pull every 2.5 acres across the farm, showing the different levels of fertility. We're then able to vary the amount of fertilizer we're applying. This map right here was produced by my combine last year whenever we were harvesting corn. It represents the varying yields as we go across the field. Around the edges of the fields, most of that is red because that's a lower yielding area of the field, mainly due to the competition of trees surrounding the field competing for nutrients and blocking sunlight. This map represents all the different soil types. Just because you see dirt out there doesn't mean that all dirt is created equally. Some soils may be well drained, some may be poorly drained, some may be highly erodible, some might have greater natural fertility. So as you can see, there's a lot of different technology that we can use, and what ties all of this together is usually a software program that we'll have on our computer that we store all this data on, that we can then go in and analyze all this data to determine what we need to do for the next year. Lob City Bajams asks, WTF is a bushel and a peck? I don't know what a peck is either myself, but I do know what a bushel is. A bushel is a unit of volume that's used to measure dry goods, equal to about 9.3 US gallons. That's a liquid measurement. I'm selling a dry measurement. So a bushel of corn is equal to 56 pounds of actual corn, 60 pounds of soybeans, 60 pounds of wheat. Currently, corn is $4.60 for a bushel. Soybeans is $10.50. Wheat is $5.50 for a bushel of wheat. Wesley Rudin asked, how crazy are the GPS systems in the tractors? Well, Wesley, they're pretty crazy. They're also crazy expensive. The GPS systems on your phone, they're probably only really accurate to within 10 to 20 feet. Now, when we're in the field, we need a lot greater accuracy. Some of the systems on these tractors can be accurate to within 1 inch of where you actually are on this earth. Now, this 1 inch accuracy is possible through the use of RTK on our systems, or real-time kinematics, using base stations located across an area. There's a lot of interference between our satellite receiver and the satellites in outer space. These base stations help correct for that error to let us know within 1 inch of where exactly we are in the field. Why do farmers need to be accurate down to the closest inch? Well, that's because GPS controls a lot more than just actually steering the tractor. A lot of times, part of our equipment is passing over a section of the field that has already been planted. So we have the ability to shut off row by row as we're going through the field as we get into an area that's already been planting, so we're not over applying seed, and we're also not spending extra money on inputs that we don't actually need. There are currently tractors being developed that don't even have a cab, don't even have a place for an operator to sit on, and will be operated completely autonomously. This question is from the subreddit, No Stupid Questions. Why does farming have such a high death rate as a job in the USA? Yes, farming can be extremely dangerous. We're operating heavy machinery. We're working with chemicals. We can be working in extreme heat. And then not only that, we're dealing with an extremely stressful career, and some of us can be facing financial ruin. I've almost been killed several times on my job. Just a few years ago, I was actually ejected through the windshield of my combine harvester as I was going down the road at about 22 miles an hour. The combine harvester came within about 5 feet of rolling over me and crushing me. I came this close to actually losing my life that day, and that actually happened because I was in a hurry and I had taken some safety shortcuts that day. Adnan Keske asks, how do you become a farmer? Like, is there just an application for it, or do you just start digging? If you're row crop farming, the one thing you most definitely need is land. And unless you already own a lot of land, you have to go convince other landowners to allow you to farm their land and show them that you can make a profit for them, because they're just not going to let you farm it for free. The way I got into farming is that I was actually born into it. I'm a 5th generation farmer. That means that there were 4 previous generations of Griggs that farmed this ground before I had the opportunity to do it. Simon Hancock asks, how much profit do you think farmers make? I can't speak to how much farmers make, but I can tell you how much we made over the last few years. In 2023, we had a gross income of $1.83 million on our farm. Now, of that gross, $72,000 of that was profit. That doesn't necessarily mean that $72,000 goes in my pocket and me and my wife can go take a nice fancy vacation. The vast majority of that $72,000 remained in the business to invest in the next year, whether it's purchasing seed, chemicals, and fertilizer for the next year, or making needed investments in equipment. In 2024, our gross income dropped to $1.65 million. And of that, there was no profit. In fact, we actually wound up losing $300,000 worth of profit. And that was even after the government subsidies that we received. Now, why do we have such a decrease in gross revenue last year? Well, right here is an ear of corn that we harvested last year. That's not a very impressive ear of corn. Our yields were devastated by long extreme drought, and we had lower yields across the board. Even though we had depressed commodity prices and lower yields, our input costs, the cost we pay for our seeds, our fertilizer, and our chemicals, were actually up due to inflation. Now, looking at 2025, we're still dealing with what's projected to be lower commodity prices and relatively high input prices. But if we can return to more of a normal year, if we avoid the drought, we're set to gross hopefully $1.51 million. And through extreme cost-cutting measures that we've taken this winter, hopefully at the end of the year, we will net about $36,000 worth of profit. Gadgy Old asks, why do farmers always need subsidies? Subsidies are necessary because farming is extremely expensive, but it's also very necessary for the survival of society. We can't control the prices that we receive for our commodities. We also can't control the weather. In my opinion, the American taxpayer actually gets a return on its investment because farming subsidies actually ensure that there is a very bountiful, cheap supply of food in the store. See, subsidies keep a lot of farmers in business. You keep farmers in business, well, there's more competition. There's more competition to produce more and more so that you can remain in business. An abundant food supply leads to a cheaper food supply. Now, there's a wide array of subsidies that can be paid to farmers, like the crop insurance that we purchase to help ensure that we don't go out of business when we experience a loss. The crop insurance premium is subsidized by the federal government. If we experience a disaster year, there might be a disaster payment. In the event of a disaster, it is very unlikely that any subsidy money will cover our losses for that year. At Joe II asks, what's the purpose of this dried out corn that's going to be harvested? Like, what do they do with it? Well, Joe, there's a whole lot of different uses for that corn. The vast majority of corn you see growing out in the fields is what we call field corn or dent corn. It's not the type that you eat off the cob, but the field corn that we grow is used for so many other purposes. 10% of the gas that you put in your car actually came from corn. It's called ethanol. Do you happen to like Mexican food? It's used in tortilla shells and many other ingredients. Do you like cornbread? It's in there also. One of the biggest uses for corn is high fructose corn syrup, a sweetener that's used in many of the products you can buy in your grocery store, especially soft drinks. Beachy Tunes asks, how big of an issue is soil erosion and what can we do about it? Is there anywhere it's particularly bad? Soil erosion is a huge problem. We have erosion caused by water running across the land and removing soil particles, but there's also wind erosion. One of the worst examples of wind erosion was actually the Dust Bowl of the 1930s when the Midwest was impacted by severe drought. Now, the Midwest was natively a grasslands and the grass helped anchor the soil and hold it into place. However, when you plowed the soil, it destroyed all of those native grasses and loosened the soil up. And then when drought came in the 1930s, it was very susceptible to wind erosion because the Midwest gets a lot of high winds. And when you have a bunch of loose, dry soil particles on the surface, the wind can pick it up and sweep it away. But here in the hills of Tennessee, erosion is a huge concern because we have hillsides funneling water into certain locations that can easily wash away the soil. Now, farming has come a long way from the Dust Bowls of the 1930s. We now have the technology called no-till. That means that we're planting and maintaining our crops without ever plowing the soil. If we're not disturbing the soil has a whole lot less chance of being eroded away. It is our goal to have a living plant growing on our ground 12 months out of the year. That means that the raindrops that are falling are not actually impacting the soil and dislodging soil particles. It's hitting the plant material first and then being diffused down to the soil. The roots actually help to hold the soil together, really minimizing the impact of erosion. We will actually harvest only about 4 to 5 months out of the year. That leaves 7 to 8 months that we don't have a crop that we're going to harvest growing, and we fill that void by planting what we call a cover crop. Any plant or a mixture of different types of plants that we actually seed into the ground to grow and anchor the soil and protect it against erosion for the fall and winter months until we get ready to plant our next cash crop. Hoot McNewt asks, I wonder how farmers keep pests, diseases, and unwanted critters away from their crops. There are pesticides that we use to kill insects or to prevent disease. However, there's other ways other than using chemicals to minimize damage to your fields, and a lot of these are referred to as cultural practices. For example, to help minimize disease in our field, we try to rotate our crops every year. We might plant corn this year, and then the following year we'll plant cotton, and then the following year we'll plant soybeans. And what we're doing is we're breaking the disease cycle because a lot of these diseases will only attack one specific crop. In our area, deer is a big problem, but they favor certain types of crops, especially soybeans. Now, there are ways to kind of help minimize that, and one of those ways is by allowing hunters onto your farm during the hunting season to help thin out the population some. But farmers have learned to accept that there will be a certain level of damage to their crops year after year after year. Tony Carrasco asks, how is soil replenished in farming fields? The matter that the plant consists of comes from the soil. When parts of these plants are removed for usage, that implies a matter deficit in this field. So isn't the field supposed to reseed with every harvest? There are certain things that the plant needs to take out of the soil in order to produce the crop. And if these nutrients are not replenished, plants will naturally deplete the soil of these nutrients. Now, that's really not going to cause the soil level to drop because a 6-inch depth of soil across an acre weighs about 2 million pounds. Well, an acre of corn might pull out 200 pounds of nitrogen, 70, 80, 90 pounds of phosphorus, a little bit less than that of potassium, and those are going to be the major nutrients that the plant uptakes. All of these nutrients will be replaced with fertilizer. So while crops are pulling something out of the soil, it's in relatively low amounts, and it's not going to cause the soil to recede year after year of growing crops. We got a question from Explain Like I'm 5 Reddit. How do farmers water their fields? If it doesn't rain, are they just screwed over for the year? Basically, if it doesn't rain, yeah, we are screwed over for the year for the most part. However, some farmers do have the ability to irrigate their fields to be able to supply supplemental water to a crop in a growing season. Now, on our farm, we don't practice any irrigation because we generally don't need it. In our climate, we receive approximately 52 inches of rainfall every year. However, as you move out west, it's a lot more arid environment, and irrigation is a lot more popular out there, and farmers can irrigate in a variety of ways. Some farmers may have center pivots, an overhead irrigation system that travels in a circle and sprinkles water on top of the crop. Other farmers, where a water supply might be more abundant, say in your rivers and streams or whatever, might practice flood irrigation to where they roll out pipe, punch holes in the pipe, and it'll shoot a stream of water down every row or every other row. Now, in really arid environments where water is a much more limited resource, farmers have drip tape installed and will run irrigation water through that tape that will then leach out in the soil. Now, this method is very efficient. However, it can be very, very expensive to install and maintain. Sam Doberman asks, how's the trade war affecting farmers? Well, Sam, the trade war is affecting farmers in some ways. However, this isn't the first time that we've been through this. During President Trump's first term in office, he entered into a trade war with China, and this affected the farmers greatly then, because while America imports all sorts of goods in from China, about the only thing that China buys from the U.S. is our agricultural commodities. So the only way that China could retaliate against the U.S. was withdrawing from purchasing agricultural economies, and this led to a multi-year period where we experienced especially depressed prices for our commodities. Towards the end of President Trump's first term, he was able to enter into a trade agreement with China in which China had guaranteed to purchase billions of more dollars of agricultural goods. However, after President Trump was voted out of office and President Biden was voted into office, China went back to doing, well, what China does, which is renege on a lot of different agreements. Now that President Trump is back in office, he's entered into another trade war, not only with China, but with a bunch of other different nations. In the near term, it is going to be painful, and we will suffer most likely depressed prices for could be an extended period of time. If President Trump is not able to get the trade deals that he wants, or the following administrations do not hold these countries to these trade deals, it's going to be just like it was the first round. We will have suffered for pretty much nothing. The American farmer produces about 16 billion bushels of corn every year. Of that, around 2.2 is exported to other countries. Exports plays a lot bigger role in soybeans. We produce around 4.5 billion bushels of soybeans every year. Of that, about 2.21 billion bushels is exported. About 85% of the 13 million bales of cotton that is produced in the U.S. every year is actually exported to other countries. So any potential cuts to these exports that I told you about could prove devastating to the American farmer for the short term. At Carol J. Hedges asks, why do weeds grow faster than crops? The crops that we grow have been bred over years and years and years for maximum production, not for survival. Our primary purpose in breeding crops is to produce a maximum amount of yield. That involves growing over a longer period of time, giving that plant a longer life cycle and the ability to capture more sunlight to be able to support that higher yield. Whereas the weeds that are present in our field have bred themselves through self-selection to survive. And one of the mechanisms that these weeds use to survive is to grow really, really quick so they can outcompete any other surrounding plants, produce their seed, and die, thus ensuring that that species of weed will survive year after year after year. Akalaki19 asks, so are GMOs bad? GMOs are perfectly safe. Now, GMOs actually came about the mid-1990s, where scientists were able to insert a Bt gene into some of our crops. And what this Bt gene is a toxin that is actually produced by bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis. Now, this Bt toxin is completely harmless to animals and people. It has no effect on us at all. However, to the lepidopteran pest or your caterpillar pest, it can be deadly. This particular ear of sweet corn is a GMO. It was genetically modified to resist certain herbicides sprayed on the fields. See, I have no problems myself either eating or consuming GMOs because they're perfectly safe. ESSA618 asks, what is the biggest expense cost you have? Farming is an expensive game. There's no secret about that. But actually identifying the most expensive part of farming, well, it can kind of vary from farm to farm to farm. For me personally, our biggest line item expense is going to be our repair and maintenance costs. On average, every year I spend between $200,000 and $300,000 repairing and maintaining our equipment. Other farms might run the newest equipment. In that case, their biggest line item expense might be actually paying for that equipment. For example, a brand new large size tractor is probably going to run you about $450,000. A brand new combine harvester is going to be approaching close to $1 million. A brand new cotton picker that we might only use 2 weeks out of every year is going to set you back about $1.2 million. So you can either spend a whole lot of money every year on equipment, not have to fix it as much, or you can run older equipment that doesn't cost as much, but you're going to pay to keep it repaired and maintained. At Arsenal Ultrist asks, how do farmers get their goods to market, Genius? Well, Genius, we haul our crops to market. Farmers is the one industry that has to buy retail, sell wholesale, and pay the freight both ways. Some places we might haul our crops just a few miles down the road. Other times we might have to haul our crops 50 to 100 miles down the road, just depending on what area or location is paying the best for our crop. At Deborah Wrights asks, what do you feel is the hardest part of farming? Farmers are the biggest gamblers out there because we're planting crops in the spring on the faith and the prayer that things will go the way they need to go to produce a profitable crop all year long with factors that we can't control ourselves, such as weather. But I've got to say, one of the most stressful things that I have to do on the farm is actually transporting equipment up and down the road. Our equipment has gotten tremendous in size. Our roads have stayed the same size. Our roads have also gotten busier due to urbanization encroaching on our farms. So transporting farm equipment in a safe manner down our busier public roads has actually become one of the more stressful things that we have to do. At Radmore Farm says, farmers do so much more than just make food. I like to think we're custodians of the countryside. What else do farmers do that you think people forget? Not only do we, grow the food and fiber that you eat and wear, we have to be agronomists, we have to be pathologists, we have to be mechanics, we might need to be electricians. There's just so many different aspects of the job that we need to have a very broad base of information in order to be successful as farmers. This next question comes from a farming subreddit. What is a day in the life of a farmer like? Well, one of the greatest benefits to being a farmer is that our life is definitely not boring. Our schedule is dictated by the seasons and, more importantly, by the weather. The past few weeks has been extremely busy because we're getting ready for planting. Myself and the crew that works with me, we've put in about 85 hours each week just to get our fields ready to plant. That's a lot longer than an 8 to 5 job, and it does not include weekends off. This latest question is from Jiggy. He asks, what do farmers do in the winter? Wintertime is one of the most important times on our farm because we are preparing for the next year. We plant in the spring. All summer long is spent tending and maintaining the crops. We harvest in fall. So a lot of winter, we're running our equipment through our shop and fixing anything that needs to be fixed, going through the finances, going through all of our data, determining what changes we need to make for next year, determining what seeds we need to buy, getting financing lined up for next year, going through training and classes to improve our operation, and so on. Karina F. Murray asks, how can we make farming more sustainable, economical, and environmentally friendly? Now, many farmers are some of the best environmentalists you will ever find out there because, well, our career, our livelihood depends on the state of the environment. However, that doesn't mean that there's not room for improvement. A lot of these companies we buy our, chemicals and our inputs from, these companies' main goal, obviously, is to sell a product, so their research is really going to skew towards pushing more of a product instead of producing less of a product. The most reliable, consistent, independent research that is done is usually done at the university level by our land-grant universities. And in my opinion, there needs to be more funding to these land-grant universities to fund more research to determine whether we can, say, cut more fertilizer or cut more products to be more sustainable and more environmentally friendly. Thick Doctor 007 asks, is it possible to switch to organic farming 100%? Yes, it is possible to switch to organic farming 100%. However, it's not necessarily easy to switch to organic farming 100%. I would have to almost completely change all of my agronomic practices. Now, this could potentially be rewarding because organic products at the store do bring a higher price than the conventionally grown products that I produce. In order to be certified organic, I must completely reject all of my conventional practices and use only organic practices for 3 consecutive years on a piece of ground before I can be certified organic. In that 3-year period, I can still grow products using organic methods. However, I cannot sell my products as organic products, and I'm receiving the price that conventional products bring. If you farm organically, you're going to have lower yields because you can't use a lot of the products that boost yields because they are considered to be supplied inorganically. I'm going to be very limited in my weed control, so I'm going to probably experience more competition from weeds, reducing yields. I'm really going to be limited in my insect control. I would also be very limited in what types of fertilizers I'm able to use, mostly only being able to use manure as a fertilizer, which is not a bad fertilizer source. However, it is slower acting and takes longer to become plant available than what our inorganic fertilizers that we use are. So while it is possible to switch 100% to organic, you're looking at a 3-year window with lower yields and lower incomes until you can finally reap the benefits of farming organically. So those are all the questions for today. Thanks for watching Farming Support.